Hi, Lou here to answer the question, what's natural for card games? We see more and more games being converted from video to tabletop and vice versa. Nonetheless, there are elements, characteristics natural to one or the other medium that are more difficult to produce in the other. And there are similar elements more natural for board games or for card games. So that's why I'm asking what's natural for card games. Board games naturally reveal all information. Think of the various forms of chess, parcheesi, checkers, go, backgammon, tic-tac-toe, mancala. They all reveal all information unless you do something to prevent it. The only uncertainty in these games, because they're two-player games partly, is that there are dice rolls in backgammon and parcheesi, which are race games. Commercial board games, of course, often use dice or even cards to provide uncertainty or unpredictability. That's also provided by more than two players. But when there are two players, you can assume your opponent is a perfect player and act accordingly, and if they're not a perfect player, generally that benefits you. In card games, the information is naturally hidden on the cards in a player's hand or face down on the table. So one person learns the secrets of his or her own hand, but not of anybody else. Uncertainty comes from random card distribution. A bridge is unusual in showing all the cards of the dummy hand after bidding so that the successful bidder knows what cards his two opponents have, but doesn't know which has which cards in which hand. Of course, card games are often for more than two players, which introduces a lot of uncertainty. You can introduce uncertainty in board games, such as with blocks. L'Attaque and its knockoff Stratego and typical block games, but it's something you have to add on. And of course you can use cards as a board if you want to, but it's something you have to add on. Board games naturally record locations and spatial relationships. That's what the board is for. Card games usually have little or no such information because there's no way to depict it, no way to show it. In all of those classic board games that I mentioned, there's maneuver or placement of pieces on the field, the board, and those pieces have geospatial relationships. They're adjacent to each other, they're diagonally adjacent to each other, they're far away, and so forth. But you don't get any of that in traditional card games. So board games are about geospatial relationships. Now there are many board games nowadays that don't follow that mold, but virtually all the old board games are games of maneuver and geospatial relationships. Sometimes this represents something in the real world. Sometimes it doesn't. Of course, in the example of chess, we would say nowadays it doesn't represent anything in the real world, but some people believe chess was originally a model of warfare in the Indian subcontinent. So board games tend to be models of something, war or racing, though sometimes we abstract that quality out of the board game. Card games are abstract. They have little or no spatial relationships. They have little or no connection with anything real. The standard deck of cards represents nothing. What you do in card playing, whether it's playing onto the table, making sets, trying to acquire high cards, has nothing to do with any real world thing. So kind of the opposite of a board game. Now, nowadays we have Euro-style board games that use the board often as a means to track status rather than a field for maneuver. In most cases, the information could be tracked in other ways, yet boards look good, they're centrally located, and they can help avoid cheating. War games, on the other hand, are trying to reflect real-world warfare, which is full of uncertainty. It's a combination of hidden information and maneuver or geospatial relationships. And what gets dropped often is the uncertainty. Now, card games also are less directly competitive than war games. The card games are more like race games, where there's little you can do to hinder or harm other players, which is also the situation in most Euro games. In fact, I haven't tried to track it, but I would say that the Euro games that rise above the average, that are really well known, like Carcassonne, Puerto Rico, Power Grid, many of those move away from the typical Euro game and closer to models and closer to involving maneuver. So as a summary, card games naturally involve hidden information. Card games are usually abstract, not models of anything. Card games rarely include maneuver or geospatial relationships, but you can go against the grain if you wish. And I think that's what makes some card games really interesting, and that's how I try to design many of my card games, to go against the natural grain of card games. And especially with decks of specialty cards rather than standard decks, you can get away from what's natural in cards. Think of the most widely known card game today, Magic the Gathering. It uses specialty cards. It's theoretically about a wizard duel, but in practice, it's an abstract game. I like to go against the grain, but then I like board war games. Your mileage may vary. Thanks for listening.